For all the budding entrepreneurs here, fasten your seatbelts as Embryo is giving you a roller coaster ride full of wisdom and experience. This session will be a perfect kickstart for your entrepreneurial journey as well as your higher studies journey. Good evening and a very warm welcome to everyone present here. Our guest for this evening will be Nishtha Tripathi, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Rohit, and good evening, everyone from the college.
We are thrilled to have you here with us, ma'am. As everyone must know, Nishta ma'am is the author of worldwide bestsellers like Unstartup, No Shortcuts, Futurepreneurs, and Seven Conversations, and is also a founder of Scholar Strategy, India's leading startup helping MBA and MS aspirants. Tripathi ma'am's book, No Shortcuts, explores how the most successful Indian startups were built by featuring interviews of their founders. Her education consulting venture, Scholar Strategy, prides itself in guiding young professionals into top universities across the world, including Harvard and MIT. Without any further ado, let's get started with our session. And first of all, we would all like to congratulate you on the success of your recently published book, Unstartup, which is available on Amazon and has been welcomed with great reviews and ratings.
Thank you so much, Rohit. And I was just thinking maybe I should keep a copy of the book here for those who haven't seen it. But yeah, it's gone really well. I published two books this year, one in January and then one in last month.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I hadn't published anything since last 4 years, and now suddenly both of the books got published in the same year. So yeah, that's how the writing life sometimes works. So thank you for inviting me. And it's really an honor because I always love working with young students, especially engineers, and it's always have a great time interacting with them. So let's keep the session as interactive as possible, and happy to share my thoughts.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Definitely, we're glad to have you. So I'll get started with the questions. So from your bio, it is quite evident that it was a very long and quite unique journey for you. Could you describe your journey briefly for our audience and also the factors which majorly affected your decisions during this period?
Yeah, that might be hard to do briefly, but I'll just give a summary so that the audience has a better perspective. First of all, I'm someone like you, okay? I mean, like 15, 20 years ago, maybe now, no, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I was sitting in in college benches like you guys do. I hail from a middle class family. I went to engineering college in Madhya Pradesh, in Indore. That was my hometown. And after that, I headed to US for my master's, and I was fortunate to get into UIUC, which is one of the top CS programs in there. And that sort of changed my life, gave me a lot of perspective. So I enjoyed my 7 years in US, during which I did my master's in computer science. Then I worked on Wallstreet for 3 years, and then I went for MBA at NYU. And this is the time when, Facebook and Twitter had started growing. Like, you started hearing that there is some guy called Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey. And what are these apps? What is going on? Because until then, US and particularly New York was very finance dominated city. Like, even if you look at NYU and Columbia, they used to be more of finance schools. But as I was on Wallstreet, that is when the 2008 crisis happened, the housing crisis. So I was on Wallstreet when Lehman Brothers went down, and I saw big banks falling like crazy. So very interesting times. By the way, I love recessions because, that separates people who talk from people who actually do things, right? So this is a great time because, never waste a crisis, as they say. So I hustled a lot in the recession time, and I was like, no, I don't want to be on Wallstreet. I want to do something in the world of startups, maybe start something of my own someday. And that kind of pushed me towards a management program like MBA. So I went to NYU again, very interesting times. Long story short, I networked a lot. I met a lot of entrepreneurs, and also I landed 2 job offers after my first year itself. So I decided to drop out of my MBA program and join one of the startup in Manhattan. I joined them, worked with them for some time, and then I've come back to India, where I tried a lot of ventures. And ultimately, what I do now is I run Scholar Strategy, which, as you introduced, is a education consulting outfit where I do career coaching as well as study abroad guidance. And I write books. I like to travel a lot. So before COVID, I used to spend 3 to 6 months in places like Bali, Thailand, or Himachal Pradesh and stuff like. So I have spent digital nomad lifestyle as well. Really enjoyed it. So I have set scholar strategy as something which gives me enough time to pursue my other interests in life as well. And that is, I think, the whole global resignation and all that stuff that we are seeing. I think I've been living it for some time now. So yeah, I've built a lifestyle that works for me. And that's what a definition of good career is for me. Like, it should work for you. Like, it may not work for somebody else, like somebody else. Motivation might be different. So figure out what works for you. And I'm glad that I've spent times or made those decisions which work for me. So yes, I've done some things differently. And if anybody's interested in knowing more or thinking of doing things like that, I'm happy to elaborate that as needed. But yeah, after coming back to India, I like writing. I'm an avid reader. And I was interested in startups always. So I wanted to start something in India, but few of my early ideas failed. And I was like, why do some people succeed, not other people, while other people like me are failing? What am I doing wrong? And I like to learn from books. So, but whenever I would turn to books or I would go to a bookshop or open Amazon, so tell me like some of the startup books that the famous startup books.
I mean, none come to mind right now.
Okay, but are you into startups much?
I'm more into pursuing education abroad, like higher studies abroad.
Acha, okay. So in startup, you would come across more like Silicon Valley books, 0 to 1,
Yes.
Lean Startup. And while these books are great, and I've met some of those people when I was in US, some of the strategies don't work in India, because Indian consumer is very different, Indian market is very different. So that's when I thought such a book should exist for India, which talks about Indian startups. What are they doing correctly? Why some people are succeeding? What are the strategies they are using? So that's how No Shortcuts came to be, which was my first startup book. And since then, I've written 3 startup books now. But I think due to the timing, because startups are creating so much buzz and so many people want to get into startups, it's been a right time. And I want to create startup literature which people can refer to, because not everyone can contact Bhavesh Agarwal or Sachin Bansal, right? But they want the advice. So read books and understand how you can build a successful startup in India. That's been my goal.
That was quite inspiring, that you tried all these different avenues and tried to find what works best for you. And
yeah,
yes ma'am. So how does a person know if they have what it takes to become an entrepreneur? Is there any particular quality or thought process involved behind being a successful entrepreneur?
Right. So of course my whole books are around that topic, but ultimately what I discovered was and why the name No Shortcuts came to be, because what I realized was that, so I had interviewed 15 startups in that book. By the way, let me just show. Yeah, I'm just going to come back. So, right. So this is the book, and it covers like 15 startups, and this came back in 2018 when these startups were not so big. So I interviewed startups like Zerodha, Unacademy, Fasos, Aether Energy, Freshworks, which is a unicorn now. So many names which are more familiar now, but they were not back then. And I interviewed the founders, and what I realized is that there was no one thing that everyone was doing. In fact, everyone was doing something differently, but it worked for them. So one thing, and that's why I called it No Shortcuts, because if there was a black and white strategy of success, then there would be millions of successful startups out in India. So there is no one way of doing things. Like for somebody pivoting worked very well. For somebody taking a lean approach worked very well, but somebody else said that pivoting is the worst thing, you should not do it. It also contained a failure story. But my whole thesis has been that entrepreneurship is a marathon, and you have to pick the idea that is right for you, which is something that the field is fundamentally interesting to you, so that even when the going is tough, even when it's a difficult market out there, you can persist. For example, let's say it's sort of a recession right now globally, right? And there is funding crunch and people are not willing to pay a lot and startups are facing a tough time. There are many layoffs as well. Now, if you have built a startup just based on the hype or because you wanted to raise money and things like that, then in such a tough environment, you will not be able to survive. For example, the first venture I tried after relocating back to India was a fashion startup. And I tried that and I gave up on it after 2 years or something. And later on, I realized that fashion does not come to me naturally. It's not a topic that excites me. So it does not make me be like thinking about it at night, that what can I do tomorrow to make this business grow. But when I started Scholar Strategy, when I started talking to students like you, and dealing into this education and career space, it was very exciting to me. It fundamentally excites me. It's in my nature. So I can do it from anywhere, even if I'm not making money, I want to do it. And that's the kind of idea you want to pick. So entrepreneurship, I think, is more about picking the stuff that is right for you. Apart from that, I don't think there's we saw very different people. Like none of these are family business people. Anybody could be an entrepreneur. And I think somebody was saying that it must have been so tough for you to leave such a high paying job in US and come back to India. But I said, I don't know. I mean, because that lifestyle was not working for me. I was not enjoying it. So for me, what I'm doing right now is the easier path, but it would be difficult for somebody else. And same thing with startups. People say that, oh, you have taken such a brave decision to start up, leave a job and start up. But no, entrepreneurs are the people who fundamentally want to do that and who would be miserable if you keep them in a job. So I think you would know from inside your heart whether you want to do a startup or not. And if you're an entrepreneur, you would not be able to live without doing it.
Yes, ma'am. That was quite an insightful answer. So,
does it make sense? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. It does make a lot of sense. Like it's not always about the most profitable job. It's more about what you want to do and what's more enjoyable for you.
Yeah, it's not about idea. It's not about picking a market, because if it was idea, like Airbnb was such a ridiculous idea, right? Like who would have thought that people would rent out their homes, right? And that's what VC said. They were not funding the founders there, but the founders stuck to their gut and they persisted. And frankly, they found other ways to make money in those initial days when they did not have funding and all. So as an entrepreneur, because this idea fundamentally excited them, because they believed in them, they persisted through that tough time. And ultimately, they were able to convince others. So I think that's what entrepreneurship is really about.
Ma'am, as you already mentioned that you also worked on Wall Street and for startups in Manhattan. So, like, how was your experience there, and what difference did you observe between the startup culture abroad in the US and in India? Like, what difference in the characteristics did you find?
Yeah, interesting question. And I think very right question, because some of you might be thinking of moving abroad, right? I would say US overall is a much mature market when it comes to anything, like be it entrepreneurship, be it finance, like whatever trends that I saw in US, they are now coming and I'm seeing them in India now, right? These things have already, so we are almost a decade back from US, right? The whole excitement about data science, machine learning that started there, now it's reaching India. The whole excitement about creator economy that was that happened there is now percolating in India. So I mean, it's sort of the first place where all these things happen. So that's why when I was in New York University and seeing that people are no longer looking to get into banking or consulting. In fact, they were looking for a tech co-founder. Like bankers were looking for tech co-founders, right? And this was 2010. And sort of we are seeing that excitement for startups now in India. So, I mean, things happen there. It's the place where everything happens for the first time. So if you are there, the exposure that you get is like so amazing. which you are just like not able to get in other parts, or at least in India. Education was very awesome. But particularly when it comes to startups, I think the fundamental difference is also that the ecosystem would be more supporting, and you would find more support there. Like people encourage that, people appreciate, respect that, oh, he's trying to start up, and if they're able to help, they will help. But they would be happy to, like, sign up and test your product out. But in India, actually, uh, and our culture is like this. It's nothing against Indians, but we are not very vocal in supporting each other, right? People would go silent. You would not hear back from people if you drop them a mail requesting something. So it's more lonely to build something in India, is what I feel. When I started writing books, I struggled a lot because I did not come from a media or publishing background. I was an engineer, MBA, and I was trying to publish books, and publishing houses will not listen to me. I used to mail authors, and they would not reply. But once I started doing well on my own, that is when people started coming and congratulating me. So the irony here is that, like, nobody would be first to say that, hey, you are doing well and let me help you. But they are there kind of watching your progress. And if you start doing well, they would come and maybe want to cheer you up. So that's just a nature of like who we are as a culture. But in US, I think you get a lot of cheerleaders. They would cheer your progress. They would introduce you to relevant networks, and also that ways I think the support is much more established. But of course, there are problems like, you can't start a company on H-1B visa, which is what my struggle was as well. And I knew that I didn't want to settle there for personal reasons. So yes, if you want to start something in US, maybe do it in the student days is a good thing, or there are other kind of visas you can explore. But if you can figure that part out, US startup ecosystem is very, very exciting. And I think a lot of interesting things happen. I mean, even you read books, there is so much meaningful information in there. So it's amazing to be there and experience that firsthand.
Ma'am, you also organized NYU Students' first entrepreneurship summit, right? So
Yeah.
uh, there were very prominent people like Seth Godin and Chris Dixon, like a very famous author and entrepreneur respectively. So
Yeah.
how was it like organizing that event and like meeting different people?
It was amazing. And I that's why I say that, like, being in college or university is such a privilege, and you should make the most advantage of it. So now that you guys are at BITS Hyderabad, you can use BITS Hyderabad platform to reach out to anybody in the world, right? You can drop a cold email to anybody in the world and say, hey, we are organizing something at BITS, would you come? Right? And you should do that. So that was my excuse. So it gave me a great opportunity to network with people in US, and I really leveraged it because, see, when I joined NYU for MBA, I was very clear that I wanted to get into startups, and startups do not recruit from business schools, right? They do not have that kind of money, and fundamentally they don't even like MBAs a lot, right? Especially early stage startups, they don't have that kind of money. So I knew that I cannot rely on campus recruitment. I will have to find a job on my own. So I knew that I had to network, I had to meet people, I had to make opportunities for myself. So that's why I thought that I was active in multiple clubs, and this was the entrepreneurship club, known as Entrepreneurship Exchange. I was vice president of something, and we thought that we should do like a big summit event. This is the right time in New York. So that's how it happened. I took the initiative, and we created panels, and it was an excellent excuse for me to reach out to everybody, and these people said yes. So they came to campus, and I made some good connections via that event. And honestly, the full-time job that I got, which made me drop out of NYU, also those founders had come for this summit, so I had invited them here. That's how I knew them. So it's always a very, very good opportunity, and you guys should leverage your time in college as much as possible.
Yes, ma'am. That's also a huge part of what we do here at Embryo, like using the BITS
Yeah,
platform to bring different kind of speakers to our students. So,
exactly.
like more in the field of studying abroad. A lot of students would be at a crossroads right now, especially the fourth year students, whether to take up a job or go abroad for their higher studies. So, like,
Yeah.
why should one choose abroad for higher education rather than staying in India? And how can India match up to the quality and reputation of education from unis abroad?
Okay, so now my answer to this question has changed recently. Okay, so let me ask you, are you asking about master's programs like MS programs, or are you talking about MBA programs?
Uh, I would like to know about both of them because we have
Sure.
both the aspirants in our audience.
Okay, so for masters, I still think US is very, very good, especially because the frontline tech companies or the core innovation work that is happening in the tech industry is happening in US. And if you want to work with those people, then MS is such a good way of doing it. So MS, first of all, education wise, it's amazing, right? Education infrastructure, professors are like, people who have won Nobel Prizes and biggest prizes of their fields. Those are the professors who teach you. Amazing peer learning, amazing exposure to resources. Like CS is still fine. I mean, maybe you can learn everything online, but for fields like, let's say, robotics or mechanical, where infrastructure also matters. I mean, US is infrastructure is just at another level. So the kind of knowledge, education from the curriculum, from the professor's perspective you can get in US is unparalleled. So if you're deeply interested in your subject and you want to explore it further, then I think US education, no doubt about it. I mean, you guys are still coming from a good college. Imagine there are so many tier 3 colleges in India where they don't teach anything, honestly. So for them, I think the US education is a no-brainer. Now, coming to the MBA part of the equation, my answer has slightly changed. Like I was a big gung-ho about like, do an MBA in US or Europe because that's where the best opportunities are. And the career growth that you can suddenly see is going to happen in US only, not from India. Especially like there's no diversity factor. You're going to be, even if you go to IIMs, first of all, getting there is extremely tough. CAT is extremely competitive. And even if you get there, I think peer learning is not there. So it's mostly about if you just want to land a job, you can do that. But frankly, even when it comes to job, like very, very few IIMs are offered the investment banking jobs. Like Goldman Sachs will not hire frontline investment banker from India. They are more likely to hire it from US or Europe. So the banking jobs that come to Indian IIMs are not the frontline investment banking jobs, right? So even from career opportunities, earlier I used to say makes sense to go to US and Europe. But slight equation ROI aspect has slightly changed because of I think the startup boom story happening in India right now. Like there is a stat, like, last year, Indian startups raised around $43 billion in funding last year alone. That's a huge amount, right? And when startups are raising that amount, what are they going to do it? They have to deploy it. They will be hiring people. And who are they going to hire? They will be hiring a lot of MBAs. And that demand is going to be so high, it's not fulfillable by IIMs alone. So even tier 2, tier 3 MBA colleges are going to see excellent placements in Indian startups going forward. So if you want to play into that startup growth story, which is happening in India right now, I think doing an MBA in India is also a very, very good bet because you don't have to spend as much. And the chances of getting into these startups, and let's say few of these startups are going to grow massively big. And if you were an early employee in these companies, you're going to make huge amount of money if you're part of that story. So that opportunity has made Indian MBA more lucrative than it was previously. But that said, if you want to work abroad, if you want to work in US, then your best bet is still to get educated in US. Because Indian MBA is not going to get you a job in US or Europe, most likely. So if you want to build a life there, you want to settle abroad, then yes, find a master's program in US or Europe and try to move out. So that's how I would think. But I have done this topic extensively in our YouTube videos. Our channel is Scholar Strategy TV. So you guys can subscribe, and there is a full like MBA planning course that I did, which talks exactly about all this. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Our audience will definitely refer to your YouTube channel for more. So, as you said, you're from a middle class family, and a lot of our audience will also be from a middle class family. So, what kind of resources or financial aids will student have if they want to pursue an education abroad? Because it's quite expensive for a middle class family to afford, especially in the
Yeah.
Ivy League colleges.
Right. Yes, that's true. And that's a topic I'm talking about a lot these days because I was getting a lot of queries. So I also took a loan when I had to go to UIUC. I had no funding at that time. But I talked to people who were attending UIUC. I talked to many Indian students. And I realized that everyone had got a assistantship after landing there. So which made me bullish that, like, there is the scene of finding scholarship. And when I say scholarship in US, it's mostly assistantships. Okay. So the chance of finding that is very high in a school like UIUC. Secondly, I saw that computer science is a field where demand is going to be pretty high. So I was pretty sure that I would land a good job after graduation. So even if I have to take a loan, I will be able to pay it off in, let's say, 2 to 3 or maybe 4 years. So with that calculated bet, I took a loan and I headed to UIUC. And as it happened, as I had guessed, I took my resume, approached the professors. I was specializing in networking back in those days. So I found a RA-ship with a professor in the electrical engineering department who worked in wireless networking. And he gave me a RA-ship offer. Now, the beauty of RA-ship is that it waives your tuition fee entirely and gives you a monthly stipend. So honestly, I started earning in dollars because that stipend was more than my living expenses. And there was no fee that I had to pay to. So suddenly I was getting educated for free and making money in US. And this can happen in a lot of good universities in US. I'm not saying the word Ivy League because it's not about Ivy League or not. It's not even about top rank university. For example, CMU does not give funding. Columbia does not give funding. Columbia, MS and CS, you may not be able to find funding, scholarships or assistantships there. So there are some schools which are funding friendly. So you should find out from your seniors or people who are already studying there that what is the chances of getting some sort of financial aid. So that is one thing. So you can easily, and especially if you're going for a thesis-based program like I was going, the aid is much easier in thesis academic kind of programs. So if you're going for a master's program, I do think, and especially you guys coming from a very good school like Bijpilani, you should be able to, like, find a good admit. And if it's a school like UIUC, UT Austin, even Stanford gives financial aid. So then your chances of getting that aid is pretty high. Yes, you might have to take a loan in the beginning, but you can find aid later on. Aid, I've seen a lot of, like, I've guided 650 plus candidates in scholar strategy so far. And we have seen funding for different programs in different universities. Sometimes you get it in the beginning itself. Sometimes you might even have to wait a semester and something works out in the later semester. So find out more about the programs you're targeting, but funding is there. So don't write off that thing that I cannot afford it and I should not even apply, because I was like you guys and I was able to find a way. So I think US definitely explore that option. And UK, a lot of scholarships are there. I think the government just announced 75 new scholarship for international students. And one of my client is going on 100% scholarship this year. So UK is scholarship friendly. Germany, thus education itself is very subsidized. So you don't have to pay much. So there are options. You will have to check out what works for you, but it is affordable in some cases. Yeah.
Ma'am, so like in all your experience at Scholar Strategy, which country would you say has been the best fit for most of your students in terms of quality of education, as well as the legal scenario with immigration and visas?
I have always been bullish and focused exclusively on US. So when people come to work with me, I tell them that my forte lies in cracking US universities because that's where my experience lies. I know a lot about them, and I feel very, very bullish about the scenario because I've seen how economy works there. And I think if you want the best career growth for yourself, US is the place to be. But the process of admission or application is quite similar in other countries as well. So Canada, UK, I mean, you need the same SOP, LORs kind of stuff in almost every country. So many of my clients use my services, use my guidance. My forte is in SOP and LORs. I help you craft the best possible story for your applications. They use that process to apply to other countries also. But I focus mostly on US.
Okay. So as you mentioned that there's going to be a big boom in like data science, machine learning. Basically, technology will be playing a huge role in the coming decade in India, right? With respect to the job market. So how do you think people's career choices are evolving and are going to evolve in the next few years? And what role will technology play in this change?
Oh, massive change. It's already happening. Like, I'm seeing overall like millennials are making such different career choices than their previous generation, right? Um, like I know so many computer engineers who do not code anymore, including me. I know so many mechanical engineers who are maybe bankers now or some other field, and people are just creators or like, enjoying the creator economy. So the careers are much more fluid now. You're not as restricted by your degrees as in previous generations. So, and that I think makes engineering a good study as well because it kind of develops your analytical problem solving skills, and then it opens up all these opportunities. It's up to you which direction you want to take up. So I think that's a good thing to have. But of course, with so many choices, people might get confused as well, and it's difficult for them to pin down what they exactly want to do in life. So I think earlier it was more about do find your passion and try to move towards it. Right now it's more like figuring out a Tetris puzzle that, like, pieces are coming in and you have to now try to fit in. Like, for example, YouTube is suddenly booming and you want to try something out on that, go ahead. Tomorrow something else, some other opportunity might come. But just a bit of warning here. For millennials, I think the caveat would be that if you do not develop your core skills in the first few years of your career and you try to be too much of a generalist or just play to like, creation, I will just like, put out some videos and I will be a famous YouTuber, it may not happen. And after 5 years, if you realize that you have not developed some core skills, then you are going to have trouble finding, let's say, a job, right? So there is a glamour around this whole global resignations happening. Like, many people are resigning from their jobs and just starting something of their own. It's very good, but it's going to work for certain 5-10% people, not for everyone else. And what are those people going to do? That will become a question mark going forward. So for you, I think don't get swayed by what everyone is doing. It's good to explore interest, but also like coming from such a good engineering schools, I think you should play to that strength, like develop those skill set, develop one area where you are extremely, extremely, extremely good at. And it's good to work in industry for some years. I'm a believer in that. And then try out, even if you want to do something of your own, try it out on side, see how it's going, see how it's exciting to you. Would you be able to sustain that? And then only like, think of quitting your careers completely.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
something to think about. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. That's definitely a huge decision. That's definitely a huge decision, and we shouldn't take it without calculating the risk properly.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, you worked with over 650 students in your startup scholar strategy. So, could you share any one story of your any one of your clients? Like it would be interesting or inspiring, or just something that stood out to you.
Oh, so many. But like, yeah, I will give you just so extreme ends. Like, sometimes people think that you need to have some work experience before you apply, or you need to have certain things. And I worked with people who did not have that. So, for example, I worked with a couple of freshers. They had very, very good and like interesting internships. but none of them are from IITs. Okay. So first of all, I don't work with a lot of IIT because IITians have their own very solid network, right? So they access each other and they don't work with consultants as much. But I work with bit students also. I work with triple IT and ITs and all. So good students. So they had good projects, and like two of our students have gone to Harvard, right? One of them went to like Stanford, although she was not an Indian. But freshers cracking very, very good schools. I've seen that happen. So it all depends on the story. If you've done interesting internships, you don't really need work ex. Second story I would tell was somebody who was 33 years old, and she was in a dead end IT job in India. And like, she knew that there is no growth in this job and she needs to get out of it. She might like even switch careers or whatever, but like she was so entrenched. It was very hard. It's hard to do all those things in 30s, right? So, but ultimately I'm glad she applied. So the profile was not too strong. So we decided not to go for an MBA because it's more competitive. So getting a very good school in MBA would have been tough. What we ended up doing was applying to a couple of the engineering management programs. And she got into MIT SEM program. And she is today a senior product manager at Salesforce and doing extremely well. So like people think it's too late if you are beyond 26 or 27, but it's nothing. There is absolutely no rule. I think you should really figure out if master's is right for me. And if it's right for you, then make it happen. I mean, admission committee would love to see diverse candidates. So if you can sell them on that story, and I know how to sell that story to admission committees because I know what they're looking for, then you can get into good school at any age whatsoever. But most important thing is, does it make sense for me? Am I doing it just because my friends are doing? Or am I not doing it because everyone thinks that like, don't go for higher education, it's looked down upon. So don't go by what people are saying. I've never listened to people. Like nobody told me to drop out of NYU. And I think that's been the best decision, that I have done what I thought was right for me. And I'm happy with those choices. So always be very, very selfish when making career decisions.
Yes, ma'am, that's something which and I'm sure a lot of our audience will keep in mind while making their own career decisions. So now coming to like your role as an author, your book Unstartup was about unacademy and how it became a 3x unicorn, right? So why did you specifically decide to write a book on unacademy? Like what was the thought process behind choosing this particular startup for the book?
Sure. So I already knew unacademy founders because I had interviewed them during No Shortcuts. So there was a chapter on unacademy in No Shortcuts, and they were only 2 years old back then, right? So they were a very different company when I had interviewed them last time, but they had got good initial traction. They had not figured out a business model, right? They were just they were YouTube channel. They had their app and all, where some people had started, I think, teaching, but that was it. So I was like, they were good for that stage, but then I saw how they had grown in next 3-4 years, and I was in touch with Gaurav and Roman. So I got to see that, like, they became a unicorn sometime, and they were first to introduce their subscription model in edtech in India, and that was pretty revolutionary, and that worked very well for them. So they stopped something called live classes and they switched entirely to the subscription model, which is a Netflix kind of a model. Then they became a unicorn, and within some months they had become a double unicorn, and they were growing extremely fast. And I had few conversations with Gaurav. So it seemed like they were doing something extraordinary. Something was going on. And it was not just sales driven. Like if you see in some ed tech startups, majority of their growth is you pump a lot into your sales engine, hire sales people in tier 2 and tier 3. I wouldn't name names, but like, that's how they are growing. But that was not the case with an academy. It was more of a product driven growth, which I thought is very interesting and inspiring in India. Like I want to see more product driven startups, good products being developed in India. So overall, as I like, I was exploring this idea that can a book be made on this? Like, is there enough material on this or not? So the good thing was that because I knew founders, so they gave me access to talk to their people. After talking to their people, I thought that yes, there are a lot of interesting things happening. And it is there. Like, if you read first two chapters where it talks about the important decisions they have made in those 3-4 years, it's extremely inspirational. So I got very inspired while writing their story itself. Like I try to use some of the strategies that I saw them making. Like, one of my favorite strategy or thing that they do is, and it's taken from Amazon, is like, focus on the inputs and not on the output. So they are a very data driven company. And what it means is, like, let's say you want to, like, have 1 million subscribers by the end of this month or something. Now that is an output metric. You can't really control that. But what you can control is, let's say, how many videos you are putting out, or what's the conversion on your video, how are the number of viewers, or what's the number of your YouTube channel or platform users, how many of them are converting to subscribers. So don't worry about the output metric. Just make sure that you are controlling the levers of your input. And example in your case would be, let's say you guys are trying to crack your dream job or a job in top tech company, right? That's not in your control. But what's in your control is how many interviews you give in next 2 months, right? How many companies you apply to, how many interviews you give, how many of them are you able to convert to. Track those. Like, if you give 100 interviews in next 2 months, I bet you are eventually going to land a job at your dream company, right? So people worry about the wrong things. So there are many things like this, a dispassionate view of how to achieve results in business, and some of them can be translated to life also. So I had a really great time writing that book. I think there are a lot of takeaways that Gaurav and the team has done extremely well. It's a little bit unfortunate that the timing of the book is not that great, because by the time the book came out, there is a slightly, like, the startup sentiment and especially ed tech are on a defensive thing right now. But otherwise, I believe that some of the things that unacademy has done in the initial years is absolutely mind blowing, and it will give a lot of ideas to people who want to start up. Yeah.
Ma'am, you're also an avid social media user, and like you're very regular with putting out content on your social media. So,
Yeah.
like, how relevant do you think social media is to your success as an author? And also, how relevant do you think social media will be to startups that are just starting out?
Okay. So, by the way, how did you guys find me? Like, where did you find me from? I don't know who contacted me, but was it through social media?
Yes, ma'am. We found out your profile through social media, and yeah, from there we tried to find out your email and contacted you.
Okay. Okay. So yes, I'm actually uh, I'm extremely active on Instagram right now. That's where we are seeing a lot of all the things that I've told you about the study abroad thing right now. So Scholar Strategy channel, I've done a lot of video content around this, and there is a lot of conversations happening there. I've just started on YouTube. It's still like in the very early phase, but I'm very active on Instagram. I was also selected as a creator on LinkedIn this year. So I'm a LinkedIn creator and top voice in the career segment there. So I post almost daily on LinkedIn as well. Um, Frankly, I'm able to do it because I really like it. I think I'm like being a writer, like, these are the things that I've always wanted to do. So I used to blog. I've been blogging since 2005, right? In fact, the job that I got with the startup in New York was because I blogged about my experience with them. So that, like, made them connect with me again. So I'm a big believer on posting thoughtful content, and, like, having found this voice via social media. uh, I was one of the early top writers on Quora in back in those days. Now I don't use it as much, but I've been writing for a long time. So media gives me an excellent platform for putting my thoughts out there, which otherwise I will not have access to. So that part I love, and I think I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? I know there are some aspects to it. It's really not good for your mental health if you just are on it all the time, if you can get addicted to it. So for me, I think the aha moment has been that um, the moment I realized that social media is not for consumption, but for creation. That sort of changed my life, my view about it, right? So I do not spend hours scrolling. I mean, I do for researching the content, but not for just like mindlessly consuming it. And I use it to get my voice out to people like you, to help, like, people out there. And honestly, social media has helped me do that a lot. I've heard from people who were struggling with something, and maybe I was able to help someone, and that means a lot to me. So I like that aspect of social media. I think it's a great platform if you use it correctly, but just be mindful of how much you're engaged on that. I think it's not going anywhere. So uh, it's very important that you make your peace with it and find out how you want to use it. And for startups also, like, nobody can ignore social media these days, right? So I'm seeing every author, everyone, if you want to um, I mean, sell anything or want your voice heard or have any sort of, like, be known for something, then you have to use social media.
Yes, ma'am. Social media is like always a growing factor to consider in any
Yes,
field.
but I'm glad that it was not around when I was studying, because I don't know how I would have passed my exams with all Instagram and TikToking going on. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. It's something we all struggle with.
Yes.
So, like one of your initial books was Seven Conversations, which I believe was like a modern interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, right? So, like it is a huge, it's a drastic shift in subject matter from something philosophical to something about startups. So, like, what caused this drastic shift, and would you ever consider revisiting writing philosophical books?
I do. I want to write fiction again sometime soon, and not just philosophical, but also try out different genre within fiction. I would love to do that. As it happened, I think so. First book is always semi-autobiographical, and that was in my case as well. So I was exploring whatever was happening in my life back then, how I was dealing with those changes. That is what got translated into that book. So it's a book that is very close to my heart. The only reason I published it, I was not like looking for any commercial success or anything. It was like my way of, like, putting a story out there which I thought many people would resonate with. So even though it was not a big success or something, I keep hearing back from like random people that I read that book, and, like, it resonated with me. That was a aha moment for me. And I'm also going through something like what was happening to that character in the book. So I feel like that was the whole purpose of that book. It was just to say something that I wanted to say, and that could be best said via a book like that. Um, After that, I've written MS book, which happened because I was running scholar strategy. There were too many queries, and I could not answer everything. So I thought I'll just like write a comprehensive guide on the topic. So that's what a MS book was. So I nonfiction is anyways very easy for me to write. And then I started exploring startups because of the reason I told you, that I wanted to learn from these entrepreneurs that how really to make a successful startup. And just like that NYU summit, the book gives you an excellent excuse to reach out to people and, like, say that, hey, I want to cover your story, and they're more likely to respond to you. So book was my way of doing it. I think it was Richard Feynman or someone who said that if you really want to learn something, start teaching it. Because if you start teaching it, you have to understand it so well that you will start reading about it, you will start really understanding what it's about. So I think books have been for me a way of doing that. I really wanted to understand what these entrepreneurs are doing differently, and I have learned tremendously from the books I have written. They have been like a master class given to me one on one by these founders, right? So I love that. And that is also the reason I do not pursue writing full time. I am not a commercial writer. I'm not a full-time writer, because then I would worry about how am I going to make money from my books. And the moment I start thinking that, it will cloud my judgment, or it will make me write only certain kind of books, which I don't want to do. Right now I have the luxury of writing whatever I want. If I want to write a murder mystery tomorrow, I'll write it. But like, if I start doing it professionally, then I will start thinking of these other things. So yeah, I mean, books are a great way of me. I write because I just cannot stop writing. And I think that's how there should be some calling in your life. Let me not use the word should. I mean, if you have a calling in life, then I think keep it away from commercial sense and do it just because you enjoy it. So that's what it is for me.
Okay, so like I'm sure some of our audience members would have some questions for you. So like we collected a few audience questions prior to the talk, and if someone has any questions right now, they can put it under the Facebook Live that is going on right now. Due to time constraint, we'll only be able to take up one or two. So, ma'am, do you mind if I ask you some of the questions
Yeah,
that
yeah,
the
please go
audience
ahead.
had?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the audience members saw your like went through your YouTube channel and found a video about where you were talking about core motivation. So like they wanted to ask you what your core motivation is, like what motivates you to wake up every day and do what you do.
Great question. I'm glad that somebody has, like, been exploring the content and really understanding what I talk about. Um, so one point I make in that video is that core motivation for most of the people who are fresh graduates or in their 20s is usually money and fame, right? And there's no harm in that. Everybody wants to kind of pay back the loans or make enough money so that they can give back to their parents, or like, help their family move to a certain level. They want to earn money and they want to earn as much money as possible. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That's fine. So that's usually the motivation. And that was my motivation as well when I finished masters. And then I went for MBA where I had to pay my fee. So I was obviously focused on that. Like, I want to make decent money. I want to like recover my investments or whatever savings I've put into it. So initial days it was money, and I'm glad because it helped me build that savings, which allowed me to experiment later on. Later on, my motivation has been more of creative expression. So I cannot do a very like mundane job, even if it pays very well, because that does not let me creatively express myself. So if you look at my books, if you look, Scholar Strategy is also evolving more as a content engine right now rather than a consulting company. We are already putting courses, products, and all this content out there. So it's all different form of expressions for me. So I really love that. So I think creative expression is a predominant motivation in my life right now. And it might again maybe change to something more of and I do see impact also in my work, but I would still say largely it's creative expression with some satisfaction coming from that I'm making an impact and helping people out there. So between the different core motivations, one thing to learn is important is that it changes over life, and that's okay. So that's why like people who have made a lot of money, all these billionaires, they always say money means nothing. And I call it bullshit. They are saying money means nothing because they have made all that money, and it's okay to feel that way. Now they are not, because they're not motivated by money anymore. But for a young student, for coming from a village, from like who has seen his father or mother working on farmlands, money is everything, and that's okay. So right, like you should always watch yourself, that what is my primary motivation right now. And that is what I saw, that like I was coaching some of the, I hope I'm not taking too much time, you can tell me. So
Not at all, ma'am.
I coached someone who was working in Microsoft Seattle, and the guy was like not very happy with his job. Now you would like, why, right? You're making good money. It's such a good company. It's a growing tech company. What else do you want? And that's exactly the reason that his motivation has moved from money to maybe something else. And now he has to figure out what kind of job or career would give him meaning in that motivation. So it changes always. Whenever you start feeling unhappy in life, you should always ask me, what is my core motivation that is not getting met right now?
Yes, ma'am. That was quite insightful. insightful, especially because there's sometimes a lot of shame around having money as a motivation factor,
Oh
and
yeah.
sometimes when your motivation changes to something else, and then that's another shift because no one talks much about that. So
Yeah.
another audience question, and this will be our last question due to the time constraint. So the audience members wanted to know whether how do they maintain an appealing profile, like what SOP LOR do employers look for, and also how to prepare for GRE, GMAT, IELTS, because Indians on an average don't struggle much with math or logical reasoning, but usually it's the essay section that they struggle with. So how do they go about that?
Yeah, so I was just doing a video on GRE today. So so as you said, like you will not have trouble probably with quant, but I think engineers also underestimate the quant section from the time perspective. You need to do timed practice. GRE is a very, very long test, and it's not like you don't know the answer to that question. But if you run out of time, or if you lose focus and and then run out of time, then it's useless, right? So you may know the answer, but if you're not able to crack it in time, then it doesn't matter. So don't take quant lightly. It's not because it's tough. It's because time runs out pretty fast. Secondly, verbal section, yes, that's where most people struggle with. So I do think that take a practice test, and preferably the ETS, the Power Prep one, which is the real test, and evaluate your answers in the verbal section. Like, which section are you really struggling the most with? The text completion, or the reading comprehension, or what? And then collect material. So for verbal, I think I really like Magoosh. And I think Manhattan Prep is also good for verbal courses. So take some of these material and do a lot of practice. The good thing is that at least for engineering programs, they focus a lot more on quant scores and not as much on verbal scores. So if you keep your quant scores very high, you can get away with a lower verbal score as well. But other than that, I think practicing from Magoosh and Manhattan should be enough. And also AWA, don't just leave it for last day. At least write out few essays and see how it's working for you. But I think Magoosh and official guide, you have to anyways finish end to end. But beyond that, I think Magoosh and maybe one or two more thing if you want. But just doing a lot of time practice test. Verbal, just one more insight. When you're solving questions in the book, let's say you kept solving the question, you don't know the answer to something, you made a guess there, and then later on you are checking the answers, right? And you will see that, oh, this answer was right, so you move on and you kind of read only the wrong questions that you got. That is wrong. What I say, if you were not sure about a question, you should mark it. And even if your guess was correct, you should really read the answer explanation of why that answer is right. And it should make sense for you, because unless you really understand why this is the right answer, you will come back to it and you may do it incorrectly in the real exam. So always mark those questions and revise them before your exam, and make sure you understand why this answer was right, and are you understanding the concept behind it. And I saw that verbal, everything makes sense. Even though in first go it looks ridiculous that why is this the right answer, if you really study it, you will figure out that yes, this is the only possible answer. So you have to get so good at that. So revision is very, very important.
Yes, ma'am. That would be quite helpful to everyone who's struggling with the verbal section. So,
Yeah.
the last question for today would be about an audience member. Since you mentioned about assistantships being, a higher percentage of them being given to us. So, in case someone is not able to avail those assistantships, like if they're at a uni that doesn't provide that much funding for that area, so how viable are part-time jobs for them, and what would you suggest in that case?
In US, part-time jobs outside campus are not great. I mean, they will because there will be some jobs you can work in a cafe, or like, do something in a restaurant or something, you are going to get paid pretty low in those jobs. So they take up a lot of your time, pay you pretty low, and don't add any skill to your resume, right? So it's only for those who are extremely worried about money. If you are really, really worried about it, you want to make that extra $500 a month, you can think of doing it. But otherwise, it's not really a good investment of your time. I think the best way to recover your money is internships and jobs. So if you just stay patient and if you think your course is good enough, you will find an internship and you will find a job. Then you are going to be able to pay back your loan easily, right? So if you can just persist through that. And also another way is to like maybe look for programs which offer co-ops. For example, Northeastern University, they have semester long co-ops which are also paid, so you can earn more along with your studies. But yeah, part-time jobs are not a great thing in US, and they are not going to like cover your tuition or anything. But if maybe a part of your living expenses. So I wouldn't spend too much of my time in a meaningless part-time job. Okay. And if you're worried about money, it's better to do that. If you're worried about money, it's better to do that homework before you apply to schools. So apply only to the schools where you think it's easy to get assistantship or where you think the fee is low. For example, all schools in Texas, they have a lower tuition fee than rest of the states. So apply to cheaper schools, apply to public universities, and where the seniors tell you that, yes, somebody was able to find assistantship or something like that. So do that research before. There's no point in getting an admit to Columbia and then realizing that you cannot afford it. So you don't end up going there, because then you have wasted your application money. You've wasted the time and energy that you put into that application, right? So apply only to schools that you can realistically go to.
Ma'am, like there has been another audience question just asked, would you be willing to take up this question?
Sure. Yeah.
So what are the things that we should focus on during our college life to build a better profile before applying to unis abroad?
Like one thing I see people making the biggest mistake on is letting your GPA slide. Because if you're, so keep a good GPA, at least 8+, okay? Because if you let your GPA slide, there is no way of compensating for it fully through anything else in your application. So don't let your GPA be ruined. So pay enough attention to academics so that you maintain a 8+ GPA. Apart from that, do very, very good projects, okay? Do good projects especially in the areas of specialization that you're thinking of. For example, somebody going for a machine learning or AI kind of specialization, do some meaningful projects, maybe a research paper, maybe a project in the industry. There are like, there are programs like MyTax in Canada, so some like exchange research kind of in summer programs. Try to do them. Do internships. Internships are valued a lot. They can add a lot to your profile, and then you can get very, very good admits even as a fresher, as I was giving you the example. So yeah, few of these things. For masters in engineering programs, honestly, extracurriculars don't matter too much. So I wouldn't worry about them a lot. I would focus on academics, projects, and internships. And maybe if you can get a research paper, that's just like additional bonus.
Okay. That was quite insightful, ma'am. Thank you. So that will be all for our session today. And thank you so much for embracing us with your words of wisdom. And it was an absolute pleasure hosting you and getting an insight into your story and the fields that you work in. So on behalf of BITS Hyderabad, I sincerely thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. It is my heartfelt gratitude to our audience for joining the session today.